Hi, Stephen. Welcome to our workshop. Can you see us well? Can you see the audience?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Hello, everyone.
Great. So this is Stephen. He is a researcher on flood resilience at the Faculty of Spatial Sciences, University of Groningen. Did I say it right, Stephen? Groningen. Can you hear me?
Yes, can still
okay.
hear you. Yes.
Yeah,
hello.
it's University of Groningen in the Netherlands. He is his PhD focuses on flood resilience in the Netherlands and the United Kingdom. His research analyzes the interactions between different actors at the local level and the roles, responsibilities of local state, civil society, and the market in the flood resilience. So very people-focused. His research in the Netherlands explores pluvial flooding in urban areas, and research in the UK, predominantly in England, focuses on the influence of local actors and flood groups. So very interesting research. I've heard about his research before, and it was really interesting, very close to my heart. The institutional, social, and legal tools or arrangements influencing flood resilience at the local level will be analyzed in both instances. So he looks at all these aspects. His previous role was as an environmental or social scientist as a consultant in London, where his projects included work on community flood, social impacts of energy infrastructure. So quite a multidisciplinary person. He was awarded the Sustainable Society Impact Award in 2016 for a video explaining his research using Lego. Quite innovative. And I've given the link to all of you, so if you want to have a look at that Lego project, it's really nice. Have a look. So now I will I will leave the platform to you, Stephen. If you can share your screen and then start with your presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for the introduction. Let's start sharing the screen. Can everyone see the screen? Yes, excellent. Well, I've had a really nice introduction. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this international webinar, or this international workshop. As has been said, my name is Stephen Forrest. I'm a PhD researcher from the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. And my PhD really focuses on flood resilience in England and the Netherlands, with a really strong focus on the local level. Now, what I'm going to talk to you about today is the emerging citizen actions and their potential contributions to flood resilience, using evidence from England and the Netherlands. Now, the structure of this presentation, I'm going to give you a bit of background into flooding. I understand you've already been listening to presentations on flooding, so I won't spend too much time on that. But what I'm going to do is really focus on England and the Netherlands and talk about the flood risk management approaches and also their flood histories. After this, well, the presentation is going to look at the potential contributions to flood resilience. We need to know, first of all, what is flood resilience and what do contributions to this mean? So I'm going to dip into the theory there, some more of the literature aspects, and then after that, we're going to look at how we can operationalize this. So what does it mean in practice? So we'll start off. Or we won't start off. The slide's not changing. There we go. Flood disasters. This is just hopefully you can see a slide that says flood disasters now. Excellent. This is just a general map. It's pulled from a very nice Dutch publication looking at climate extremes, including the impact of too much water. I just want to show you on this that flooding is a global problem, and it affects a lot of countries within this. It can cause a lot of disruption, damage, and casualties when it strikes, and it can also have both mental and physical health impacts. There's also a prediction of increased flooding, so an increase in the frequency and intensity of flood events due to climate change. This can be partially due to urbanization, so we're seeing a growth in urbanization and a growing concentration of people and assets within urban areas. This can lead to two different types of pressures. First of all, you have the increase in impermeable surfaces. So these are surfaces which do not allow water to infiltrate. And this is growing not only because you need to build more houses, but also because of individual household preferences. For example, for paving over your garden and instead of having a tarmac. Another one would be that there's a pressure on land. And this means that planners, urban planners, are making decisions over where to build new properties, which they may not have made in other times. For example, they're choosing to build in areas that they know have a high flood risk or will flood in the future. So these two aspects are really causing urbanization to be important when you think about flooding, and it's potentially leading to an increase in flooding in the future. Now, this was a really quick overview of flooding. Hopefully you're still following me, and hopefully you can also draw from your experiences across the 2 days. I'm going to now focus more on the Netherlands and England. So for those who may not know, that's where England and the Netherlands are located. So they're both North European countries. And they both have a history of flooding and also a history of undertaking different flood risk management approaches. So we'll start off with the Netherlands. So this is from 1421, a few hundred years ago. And this just shows that flooding is an issue or was an issue. And you can see the damage and disruption being caused within this image. And then in 1825, you can also see here a house being submerged by the floodwaters and people on boats trying to save what they can and who they can. Essentially, the Netherlands has a very strong history of flooding, and it has to take very bold measures in order to deal with this. Now, this figure, some of you may recognize this photo. On one side, you can see it's a big wall. One side is fresh water, one side is salt water. This is the Afsluitdijk. This is located in the Netherlands. And it's a major engineering solution to reduce flood risk. This was built in 1927. And you can see here on the map the Zuiderzee project, so the one in green, shows you the project and how it's changed. On the one on the right, which says 1850, or the one with the bluer one, that shows what it used to be like. And you can see that if you keep your eyes on the shape, it changes. So you can see that land has been reclaimed. The dam, which is about 30 kilometers long, was created, and it provided not only flood risk protection as a flood defense, but also led to an opportunity to reclaim land. And they did this with several polders, which were then inhabited and used for agriculture as well. There's more to this rich history of Dutch flood risk management. Another significant mark or significant moment in their history would be in 1953, when there was the North Sea flood. This affected both England and the Netherlands, and also neighbouring countries such as Belgium. As you can see here, large amounts of the country were flooded, in neighbourhoods and streets as well. And you can also see the remains of a dike that is broken. So seawalls, protective measures were overcome in these floods. And this very disruptive flood led to a recalculation or a renewal of flood risk management approaches, and led to the Delta works and more engineering solutions. And since that time, it's kind of been assumed that flood risk management is taken care of and flood risk isn't a problem. However, there have been some recent scares, and there have been some near-miss flood events in 1993 and 1995. These were mainly river flooding, and then these led to about 250,000 people being evacuated. This happened domestically, but the Dutch flood risk management approach was also influenced by external events, such as Hurricane Katrina in the USA. As you can see on the slide, catastrophic. It talks about the levees and how it threatened to inundate a city. This was worrying because a lot of the Netherlands is protected by levees. there were also concerns that climate change was leading to flood risks that weren't seen in the past. So these were flood risks that were greater than before. But there was concern that the current flood risk management approaches and the dikes and the sea walls wouldn't be enough. And this led to a new Delta program, and this incorporated the idea of climate change and the idea that the floods that we've seen in the past may be worse in the future and therefore cause more damage, and therefore we need to be more adaptable and more flexible in the approaches that we take to solving it. Even more recently, and as part of this, there's been a new threat, pluvial flooding. How many people know what pluvial flooding is? And this is the point you can raise your hands in the air and I'll hopefully be able to see you. Yes, some people are waving, some people are not. Okay, well, pluvial flooding, I'll call it rainfall flooding. It's essentially extreme and intense rainfall events. These can be over a long period of time where rain builds up, the water table rises, and then you have the system being overwhelmed, and then you have surface level flooding. It can also be linked to rivers being overwhelmed, and to some extent, this is becoming a bigger problem in the Netherlands. They've had some serious flood events from rainfall flooding in the past decade, and these have caused tens of millions of euros worth of problems. It's being acknowledged as not a present risk, but a future one, and therefore planners need to consider how they can change the cities in order to better prepare and better accommodate rainfall flooding in the future. Because it's predicted to get worse. With climate change, the prediction is that the Netherlands will experience wetter winters with more extreme rainfall and fewer rainy summer days, but these summer days will have more intense rainfall. So it's a growing problem, and it's a problem which is different to previous problems. The Dutch are very good with coastal and river flooding, and this rainfall flooding is different. You may not be able to see the body of water until the flood has happened. So you have visible signs with coastal flooding and with river flooding, but with rainfall flooding, it's been something which isn't always there. It's an invisible hazard. And this has been incorporated into national plans, this idea that it's not visible, so it needs to be tackled in a different way. This idea of spatial adaptation has been created in this national Delta plan. And this was from 2018. They had a Ruimtelijke section, or spatial adaptation section. And this was about changing the urban environment and the urban landscape to better accommodate floodwaters or to better accommodate extreme rainfall. As you can see on the slide, you can see some green roofs, green buildings, fairly green, and also a pond for water to accumulate in. Some of these measures, especially the pond area, is to really make water more visible. So if you see an extreme rainfall event, you see the water rising, you may connect it with an increased flood risk. However, this is problematic. This is, in the past, if you wanted to build a dike or a seawall, the government would take control. They would construct it, they would hire people to construct it, and then they would do it fairly easily on their own. However, when you're trying to change the inner city, it becomes more problematic because the land isn't, you have to change the land, but land ownership is more fragmented. In typical Dutch cities that I've at least come across, you have about 10 to 15% of the land owned by the council or by the public authorities. The remaining land is owned by private actors, businesses, and also communities and citizens. So what you're seeing here is public authorities questioning or finding the limits of their involvement and then seeking to involve communities more. And this is the Dutch context for more citizen action on flood resilience and contributions to flood resilience. So that was a really brief introduction to the Dutch case. In England, you have a similar. I'll go through this again. Here's England for those who are not sure of where it is. Flood events are on the rise in England. You have the 1953 flood event, which led 330 people dead and £1.2 billion worth of damage. But you also had more recent floods in 1998, 2000, 2004 Boscastle, 2007 Hull, 2009 Cumbria, 2012, 2013, 14, so on. Now, I'm saying a load of dates, and I'm also saying a load of places that you may never have heard of. The important thing here is to see that recently there have been a lot of flood events. And these places aren't all located in, all these floods aren't located in the same place. They're in different places across. You're not dealing with one type of flood in one area. You're dealing with many different types of flood risk across the whole country. It's estimated that there's about 4.8 million people, a million properties, sorry, risk of flooding in England alone. So it's a big problem. What do we do about it? Well, in England, as a brief history to flood management, after World War II, the focus was really on land drainage and hard engineering. It was a government responsibility, and there was little regard for environmental impact. However, there was a shift in the 1980s to the 1990s from an agricultural focus to a more urban flood defence focus. At this time, national flood policy was determined by central government. However, after the 1990s, there was a greater recognition of environmental values and an increase in soft engineering, for example, flood warnings. Flood insurance also became more important. And this is a key point to realise, because up to now it's been very much a government responsibility. However, by having flood insurance, you're actually outsourcing some of the risk and some of the responsibility from the state to the individual. The individual recovery aspect is now focused on the need to get flood insurance. If you have flood insurance, then you can take care of yourself. If you don't have flood insurance, then you need to pay yourself and you need to take the responsibility to get it. So this is an important shift. At this point, you also saw a recognition that the state couldn't simply keep the water out. What we're seeing here with this recognition is a growing role for citizens and communities. The state cannot do it alone. Who can they ask? And in this case, they're asking local residents and local citizens to take a bigger role. And we've seen this in England, and perhaps more in a more developed way than in the Netherlands, with this idea of flood groups. Now, these are a form of civil society or community group, and they're made of volunteers, so they don't get paid, but they choose to get involved in local flood issues. And these groups are forming across England. It's not really organised in a specific way. It's just people coming together. Maybe they've been flooded themselves or are at flood risk, and they decided we need to take some action. And it's increasing in number. You can see from 10 years, or within 10 years, it's gone from 50 groups to at least 234 groups. And they can take a range of roles, from action to advocacy. In the pictures, you can see it regarding education. They're trying to educate school kids about the dangers of flooding. In the other picture, where they're in their high-vis jackets, you're really seeing them taking physical action. Here they're clearing drains to reduce flood risk. So that's an overview of Netherlands and England, and hopefully you can see that there's a growing need and a growing position, status, or role for citizens and communities. Overall, both of them have long flood histories, and they're both still at risk of flooding. We're seeing emerging communities and citizens, but how do we understand their contributions to flood resilience? So firstly, let's ask, what is flood resilience? Now, there is a video, but I won't show the video because Namrata's already shared it with you. So you can look at this later. It's only 60 seconds, and it just describes flood resilience. Maybe you can use it if you don't quite follow my explanation now. But flood resilience is essentially a shift in how we think about flooding and flood risk management. Previously, we built dikes, we built walls, and we tried to keep the water out. We're really focused on large-scale engineering solutions and controlling the flood hazard. However, this can be problematic because these defenses can break. They can be overwhelmed. So you need a plan B. What happens if the dike breaks? What happens if the seawall fails? And this is where flood resilience comes in. It's more holistic. It looks at resisting the water, but it also looks at living with the water. It's adaptation, small incremental changes, and also transformation, so radical changes. And you can understand really the ability of a social system, so your neighborhood, your local community, to withstand and recover from a flood event. Now, flood resilience is a very broad concept, and there are many different definitions and different interpretations. This is partly because of its history. It came from engineering, it developed in ecology, it's also been through psychology, and is now more within city planning and disaster risk management. It has a long history, but from my research, I would distinguish three different types of flood resilience. I would say that you had engineering, ecological, and evolutionary. Evolutionary can also be understood as socio-ecological resilience. When I say that these three, I'm not limiting them to disciplines. I'm not saying that an engineering solution can only fit within the engineering interpretation, nor am I saying anything with nature has to be within ecological. These are just general interpretations drawn from these disciplines, but can be applied to other instances as well. Now, I have three very crude graphs, which hopefully will illustrate what I mean by flood resilience. Here's a nice graph, or a very basic graph. You can see on the x-axis you have time. The y-axis is point undefined. It's talking about the system, and this is where we can go into really in-depth conversations about what I mean by the system and what's included and where the boundaries are drawn. To simplify, I'm just going to say it's the social system and the urban system, the physical and the natural. And as you can see, there's a line. So at the beginning, there's equilibrium point. That's the system normally. And then there's a point at which the line goes down and drops. There's a dip. The point at which it drops is when the disaster hits. It's when that flood hazard happens. So you see a change in the system. It goes down, it gets disturbed, and then it recovers back to the same point. This is the idea of resilience as bounce back, and it's reproducing the same system that happened before the flood. This is similar to engineering, since the engineering perspective at least was how can you bend a material, how far can you bend it, and still have it return to its original state. Here you're looking at speed of recovery and extent of damage. You then have the ecological perspective. Now, some of you may have noticed that it doesn't quite line up. The first line at the beginning is very straight. You have an equilibrium. Then there's a drop. Disaster happens. But the second line is higher. It's gone to a different state. An ecological perspective is that resilience leads to a change in the structure of the system, but maybe not in the function. It also thinks that there is an equilibrium within the system. The system isn't that messy. There's a difference here. The first one was bouncing. This would be bounced forwards. It's identifying that there was a flood, there was a disaster. Therefore, there are vulnerabilities that we don't want to reproduce. Why should we rebuild it exactly as it was when it was damaged last time? Here, the idea is we won't build it back the same, we'll build it back better, and we will remove the vulnerabilities. And it can go to different levels. An evolutionary perspective is the one favoured planners and also is becoming more widespread in disaster management. It just rejects the idea of equilibrium. You have continuous change, continuous in flood risk, flood consequences, and also preparedness of a society to deal with it. Of course, this is the presence of resilience. You can also have lines after a disaster coming downwards, when you could argue that the system wasn't resilient, and you might have a collapse of the system. Now, this is very interesting from a theoretical perspective. It would also be good to operationalize it. And that's what I've done in this diagram. Now, it might seem like a bit of a scary diagram, but don't worry. I'm not going to go into all of the points. I'm just going to pull out that there are three phases: before the flood, during the flood, and after the flood. After being imminent, and when there is no flood present. There are also changes that happen throughout. It relates to learning and changes in capacity and also social networks. So there's constant change, but also some discernible categories we can look at. I'm going to introduce some data now from the Upper Calder Valley. That's this area of England. On the map, you can see Todmorden, Hebden Bridge, and Mytholmroyd. This is a valley area, which suffers from both river and rainfall flooding. The water would move from Todmorden towards Hebden Bridge and then towards Mytholmroyd, causing a lot of damage. My approach was a qualitative approach, where I undertook interviews before the disaster and after the disaster. So I have a continuous picture of how things developed or didn't develop as a result of the floods. What did I find? I used this framework to structure my research. I looked at the categories, and through the interviews, I was able to develop the framework and develop it with examples. It was an iterative process. Before, you could see the communities being involved in arranging floodable areas, and also collecting and buying temporary barriers. On the diagram, you can see an example of leaky dams. This was a mitigation approach favoured by communities in the area and was actually built by a local farmer. Also involved in flood risk communication and creating flood stores, but also warning individuals and neighbours. During the flood, there was more urgency to the problem. You can see here the sign, the cooperative, the green shop background being flooded. And you can also see people dealing with flood. There's a person keeping dry and another person with a cup of tea sharing it with those flooded. At this point, it was reinforcing the barriers as best you can, but it was also reducing losses and trying to help those who needed support. After the flood, you saw different levels of citizen and community involvement. Here you can see the damage on the left, or the damage in the shopping trolleys. This is all of the disruption. This is all the stuff that was contaminated and brought out by citizens and communities. In the other picture, you can see people with brooms trying to wipe away contaminants in the water. They're trying to clean up. This was more spontaneous volunteering, using resources purchased in advance of the floods by communities. These resources were located as central points across the town so that citizens could go and then after the flood access them. So they didn't need to go out and buy them themselves. It was a more coordinated approach. You also saw this idea of adaptation, so small incremental changes, people taking property level protection measures, trying to make the household resilient in an engineering sense. But you also saw a transformation. This is when people questioned the status quo. They didn't want to resist change, they wanted to embrace it. And this is where flood groups appeared. This is also where they tried to restructure society in a way that would be better able to handle flooding in the future. Within this, you also saw ongoing changes, so relating to social networks and also knowledge exchange between authorities and also locals, and examples of learning. In the Netherlands, so this is the Netherlands, the red dots up. This is a short example. From my research, I found that community involvement is stronger in England than it is in the Netherlands. Here you can see after a flood, people were most active with flood experience being shared, a role in neighbourhood planning and planting trees within the local area, urban living, so garden storage containers, north of rainfall containers. That were, in some cases, done by citizens themselves, only by themselves. But in Arnhem and in the Netherlands, there was a greater role for the authorities, for the public authorities. They had a role in consulting and facilitating citizens, more active than in England. The authorities, not the citizens. Consulted for ideas, they encouraged decoupling. But they also, when you consult citizens, you also have this NIMBYism, or this not in front of my house. That tree, that sounds like a good idea. I don't want it in front of my house, though. You can have it in front of my neighbour's house, but not mine, because it'll spoil my view. So you have these types of challenges happening. But you also see an exchange of knowledge between the citizens through workshops. How can you install your own rain barrel? How can you decouple your household from the mains, from the public sewers, so that you are now responsible for your own water problems or your own extreme rainfall accumulation? They also took an approach for incentivizing citizens. This thing called Operation Stonebreak, Operation Stonebreak, and it was incentivizing the greening of gardens. And the municipality, so the council, made a deal with a gardening centre. For every 5 meters squared of patio slabs provided, the gardening centre would get 5 meters squared of greenery. So this was a direct intervention by the authorities to increase personal responsibility, to take action for themselves. Now I'm wrapping up now, and I'd like to just pose a question. I've talked about emerging citizen action, but are all our problems being solved? We have to be really critical here. They're taking action, maybe they're trying to represent the community, but community is a vague word. Who is the community? Which community is being represented? Is only those with power, those maybe wealthier, retirees perhaps, and maybe more marginalized groups will be excluded. Maybe those who are poorer have a family. If you have a family and you're trying to feed them, would you be worried about flood risk? Probably not. You also have to question, what's the purpose of these activities? Who's doing them? Who benefits? And who decides where to begin and where to stop? Which neighborhoods are chosen, which aren't? These are also done for free. These are citizen community actions. Are they sustainable into the future? They're done by volunteers. If there's a flood event, you can really capture their imagination and then they can take action. If there's 2-3 years without a flood, perhaps apathy will creep in and people will choose not to take action. And then all the work that's been done after the flood will be lost. You can also see conflict between new groups and existing groups with different agendas. They can work together to achieve more than one group can on their own. You can also see potential conflict. And then this can be problematic for the authorities themselves and also for the resistance. We also have the role of the state. Seeing this great empowered civil society, and we see communities being more active and more powerful and able to really stop flooding themselves. Or are we seeing a retreat in government, a state that says, we don't want to pay for this anymore. We want you to do it for free. So are they being empowered or are they being abandoned? So I'd say citizen action, even the examples I've shown you, are promising, but not perfect by any means. And to conclude, England and the Netherlands are at flood risk, but in both of them, despite different flood histories and approaches for flood risk management, they're both having a growing role of communities and citizens. There's a paradigm shift to flood resilience within this, so not just flood hazard control, but also consequences. But there are 3 different interpretations that exist, or at least that I propose that exist. Communities and citizens can contribute to flood resilience, and this can be explained in time-based frameworks. The framework I showed you was an example of this, but authorities still have a role to play. Overall, we need to acknowledge the benefits of this growing role, but also question the power distribution, the purpose, and also the sustainability of these approaches. And that's the end. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Stephen. Although the sound was a bit not the best quality, but I think we got the gist, and I guess it's understandable how the citizen science, the citizen participation in risk reduction and resilience building has been quite important, especially I think in the European context. Before I open questions to the audience, I would like to ask you, in the context of developing nations, where do you think, how much is the motivation and how much is the government will or political will Where do you see such activities happening in the context of developing nation, for example, Brazil? Because there are a lot more, there are more areas of concern in places like this, and if we think about such aspects in the context of developing nations, do you see these things happening in countries like Brazil?
Okay, thank you for your question. Can you still hear me? I hope you can.
I can.
I'm gonna stop sharing and
yes, fabulous. Yeah, that's better.
Nope.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes,
yes.
I can. Can you
Okay.
hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. It's a very good question, and I think it really depends on the context and the area in which you're looking. Of course, you can do differences on the map that I showed between Asia and Latin America and Africa, and South America. Within the Brazilian context, let me begin again. In a lot of contexts, the problem is that authorities are willing to take action when they see a problem. If there's a flood that's happened, you will see politicians lining up to pledge support and to pledge action. However, when the floodwaters have receded, a lot of these promises also recede. And you see this in a lot of countries, and it's problematic. So, from the message in the lecture that I've just given, I think the idea would be taking a holistic approach. Mm-hmm. So you're not just there after the flood has happened or when the flood is happening, but you're also there thinking about what happens next time. And in a lot of cases, including in Brazil, it's not a case of if a flood will happen, it's more of a case when it will happen.
Yeah.
And we already have the knowledge of areas which are at flood risk. We have the flood mapping data for physical risk. However, we're missing the social aspect.
Yeah.
We don't know how well communities can cope with the flood damage. And when a flood happens, richer communities have more capacity than less rich or poorer communities. We don't know how this will play out. Informal settlements as well also have more troubles than wealthier settlements. So you see an uneven distribution of risk, but also of capacity to deal with risk.
Yeah, okay. That kind of answers my question, because I know there is no actual answer for that question. It's a very tricky one, and we are facing that question, I think, everywhere in the world. So even if it's Netherlands or England, I think the political will comes, it's the primary thing if there is a will from the government, because communities tend to forget quite fast. Memories try to go down after the flood. The sustainability of such community-led aspects or community-led resilience measures may go down. So for how long those things will carry on, that remains in the hand of government also. Like, what is their motivation? Why should such links should carry on, and how good the community cohesion works? I guess those things should be taken into account before making people, or maybe awareness, a little more awareness. These are the factors, I think, from my research also I have seen that these factors have come up to be quite relevant for this kind of practices.
I think also, building on that, it's this idea that flood risk management shouldn't just be building something.
Yeah.
It should be more holistic, and it should be about transformation. And when you look at transformation, you're saying to a community, or the community saying to you, that they don't just want a new dike, they don't just want a new seawall. They may want wider improvements in residential areas. They may want, in the Netherlands, you have water plazas, which function both as, it's multifunctional. It functions both as a water storage area, but also a recreation area.
Yeah.
People may also see green spaces as valuable for flood risk management, but also for aesthetics, for a nice place to go through.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's bundling it together so that people don't just think there's a flood. This might happen in the future. We need to think about it. It's more, how can we change it today?
Yeah.
What can we do, and what can we change, and how can we make people aspire for it?
Absolutely, yes. Making people a participation, that's the main thing. And asking people to be a part of the change rather than telling them what to do is the main thing. Making them part of the change rather than prescribing them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In some cases, it may be that the community leads the way.
Yeah.
And then the planner or the person there
Absolutely.
has to follow, has
Yeah.
to think, how can we help them? But we don't want to institutionalize it and make it too rigid.
Yeah. So the floor is open for questions. I'm sure you have some questions. This is a very people-focused approach. So a bit different from the engineering approach you are most probably used to. But that gives you a different perspective, what else can work. So it's open to you. Stephen is happy to answer your questions. Any questions? Yes, I see a hand there.
Hi, Stephen. I am André, and my question is if you know some study or method to measure the impact of the community participation for convince them to participate more and more.
So I got part of that. Was that Andre? The question was regarding
Measurement.
how you can get people to participate more?
How is there a model, or is there anything that in any way of measuring the impact people are, impact of participation, so that it becomes easier to convince to continue with such approach?
It's a very difficult question, and I think one of the ways of doing it is really through proxies. And you can see certain things such as the presence of initiatives. And then when you know that there is a presence or absence of initiatives, you can then look at the actions that they do. And then the kind of effects of what they do. So I don't think it's good, and I don't think it's wise to try and come up with a monetary figure to say how good participation is, and this is why it gives you X amount of money. Because to an extent, citizens are doing it in some cases out of the goodness of their hearts, as cheesy as that sounds. They're doing it because they want to make a difference and they have strong moral standards or stances. If you're suddenly saying, yes, good stuff, we now want to put a price on this leads to all kinds of ethical issues. If you're saying you're doing something, you're devaluing the work they're doing perhaps. What if you have disagreement because you won't be able to accurately get it? But then should the authorities then actually pay for this and give people money? And then you're talking about professionalizing it instead of having it as a voluntary activity. So I think it's very problematic to capture it monetary. In terms of benefits, it's more on the proxy. What can be seen to be done? I think that's the way forward.
Thank you.
I hope I answered your question.
Everything cannot be measured. That's the problem. We cannot come up with numbers. But yes, it is a good proxy just to see if it has improved the quality of life of people, if they are integrating, the social cohesion has increased, people are spending more time outside in a nice area where there is a water reservoir. So the overall livelihood of people have improved. Things like that can be part of measurement. Yes, Stephen, you want to say something to that?
Yes, I was going to say one of the benefits that just came to me from infrastructure development would be relating to the fact that you've got an active group of people, or people who are taking part in an initiative in an area. That means you've already got a pool of people who are interested, and then if you do future projects, maybe unrelated to flood risk management, you already have a pool of people to start with. And in that case, if they've shown a willingness to work with you, and you've given a good impression on them, you may find it easier to do similar tasks and similar interventions.
Great. So, any more questions? Think about your presentations. You might want to think something around that and how those questions that are popping up now, which you will be presenting soon. And I would like to have some people perspective in that. So this is the person to ask. So think about it. Maybe from your own areas, from your own regions, did you see anything like that happening anywhere? Like communities coming together to improve the or reduce the risk in terms of flood risk or any other kind of activities. Did you see any voluntary activities in your area?
Or maybe as a question for the student or for the participants.
Yeah.
I've told you a story of citizens being more involved and communities taking more actions.
Yeah.
If your neighborhood was at risk of flooding,
Yeah.
would you take action?
Exactly. Yeah. That's the question to you. If that's the case in your neighborhood, would you be interested in taking action? Or would you say that's the responsibility of government, they should come and take action? That's a big question, isn't it? Right. Okay, so Stephen, thank you very much. If there are other questions coming, we have your email address. So you might be getting some more questions later on, but I'm sure you'll be happy to answer. And thank you very much for showing us a different perspective, humanistic perspective of looking at flood risk management. And I truly enjoyed, and I'm sure everybody else has enjoyed a lot, your presentation. Thank you for participating. Yes?
Yes.
So,
Thank
there
you
is
for
one
inviting me.
question.
Oh, something's happened.
Okay. Right.
Hi, Steven. My name is João. I don't know.
I can't. I'm assuming, is that a
Can you hear
question
me?
or I see the microphone?
Yes, a
go.
question.
Okay.
I would like to know a little bit more about resilient household measures. You talked about it, but I didn't understand quite well.
Okay, so that's a very good question. The idea you can also think of resilient household measures as forms of PLP, or property level protection. And these can range from areas where you're trying to resist, so an engineering perspective, where you may have a flood gate or a flood barrier installed on your front door. Then this would stop the water from coming in, so as resistance. You might have this idea of adaptation, so a more ecological perspective, where inside your home, instead of having carpets, you'll have a stone floor. And you won't have any kind of precious items or documents on the ground floor or in the bottom cupboards, but you'll have them higher up. And then you can also go further. So you can have your kitchen surfaces ready to be wiped away in case there's flood water contaminates them. Because one of the issues is flood water contamination. When flood water touches it, it's very dirty. A lot of things just need to be destroyed. But in terms of transformation, you can get houses redesigned so that they're easier to replace, or the parts of them are. So you have plasterboard in the walls. A lot of the time it goes upways, vertically. So if you have, say, 0.5 meter of flood water in the whole room, all of your plasterboard or your wall parts have to be replaced. However, if these are lying horizontally, only the bottom level has to be replaced. So it's trying to understand the consequences, so to stop the water coming in, but then also making changes so it's easier to recover and to allow water to come in. Make the changes afterwards, clean up, and then within a week be back to normal and continuing. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Stephen. So, any more questions? I'll give them a minute. Okay, seems like we have covered it all. So yes, if they come up with any other burning questions, they will be sent directly to you, Stephen. So shall we give Stephen another round of applause?
Thank you, everyone. And thanks again. I hope you have a really good presentation and the rest of the time.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.